Welcome, sleepy traveler. You've arrived at a quiet space made just for you. My name is Valarie, and I am here to guide you gently into rest, to help ease your mind, soften your body, and drift you toward a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether your day was long or your thoughts feel a little too loud tonight, let this be your permission to slow down, to breathe, and to simply be. There's nothing more to do now. Just allow my voice to be your guide as we begin this gentle journey toward deep, nourishing rest. If you're new here, subscribe for sleep content like this, and like this video if you find it enjoyable. Let's begin by gently arriving. Notice the way your body feels against whatever is supporting you. The pillow beneath your head. The blanket that cradles you like a soft embrace. The stillness that begins to settle around you. Inhale slowly through your nose. Hold it for just a moment. And now exhale gently through your mouth. Let your breath carry away any tension. Let it dissolve into the air like mist. You are safe. You are supported. There is nothing you need to do. Know where you need to be. Sleep will find you when you are ready. And until then, let's simply rest here together. Breathing in softness. Breathing out what no longer serves you. Breathing in peace. Breathing out the weight of the day. Feel your shoulders begin to drop. Your jaw unclenching. Your thoughts beginning to quiet. Imagine a warm light above your head. Soft and golden like the last light of dusk. This light slowly begins to flow down, touching your forehead, your temples, your cheeks. It brings a calming, gentle energy. You might even feel a slight tingling, a subtle warmth, a quiet sigh from within. Let the light travel down your neck, releasing any tightness as it goes. Feel it drift across your shoulders, softening the space between your shoulder blades. You are allowed to let go. You are allowed to rest. If your mind drifts, that's okay. Just gently return to your breath. This is a space of gentleness. No judgment, no expectation. The light continues its journey down your arms, softening your elbows, your wrists, your hands, until it reaches the very tips of your fingers. With each breath, your body becomes more and more at ease. The light now flows through your chest, settling into your heart space. You may feel warmth. You may feel openness, or simply stillness. Whatever you feel is welcome. Let that golden glow continue down into your belly, relaxing your abdomen, your hips, and your thighs. Any tightness simply melts into the softness of your surroundings. You are so deeply supported here. Let the glow wash through your knees, your calves, your ankles, and your feet, down to each gentle toe. And now your entire body is bathed in this calming light. Held. Safe. You may notice thoughts floating in and out. That's completely natural. Imagine each thought as a leaf floating on a stream. You can watch it pass by, and then gently return to your breath, breathing in comfort, breathing out tension. Each breath brings you closer to rest, closer to peace, closer to sleep. Let your awareness soften now. The world can wait. This moment is for you. Your breath is your anchor. It will guide you gently through the waves of thought. There is nothing to do, no effort to be made. Just rest. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to release. You are allowed to sleep. This journey is yours. And I'll be right here, guiding you softly into stillness. With every word, with every breath. Your body unwinds. Your mind becomes quieter. Your heart rests a little more. If you'd like, place one hand on your heart and one on your belly. Feel the gentle rhythm of your breath, the subtle rise and fall. This is your rhythm, a quiet lullaby from within. Let it soothe you. Let it guide you. Tonight you do not have to carry anything alone. You are held by your breath, by this moment, and by the deep, quiet rest that awaits you. Let go. Let go. Let go. And as you drift deeper, if this meditation has brought you a sense of comfort or peace, consider gently supporting this space by liking, subscribing, or leaving a kind comment. It helps others find this moment of rest too, and it means the world. Now return once more to your breath. Let it be slow. Let it be soft. There is nothing else to do. Let the sounds around you fade. Let your inner world grow quiet. Let the stars above keep watch as you fall into sleep. You are safe. You are loved. And you are enough. Exactly as you are. Rest now, dear one. Sleep is near. And I'll be right here as you drift away. Let us take a journey together, one that moves slowly, gently toward rest. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a vast open field. The air is warm, like early evening in the middle of summer. The sky above you is painted in soft pastels, hues of dusty rose, honey gold, and fading lilac. And just in front of you, stretching as far as your eyes can see, is a field of lavender. Each stalk sways gently in the breeze, releasing a calming, earthy fragrance into the air. You inhale deeply, and the scent seems to reach every corner of your being. With each breath, your body softens, loosens, unwinds. You take a step forward onto a winding path that curls through the center of the lavender field. The ground beneath your feet is soft and cool, made of sun-warmed earth and ancient stone. As you walk slowly, you notice the hum of bees moving from bloom to bloom, unhurried and content. The sound is low, soothing, almost like the gentle purr of a cat curled beside you. Birdsong drifts from somewhere far off, lazily echoing from the trees that line the far horizon. You keep walking, one quiet step at a time. With every step, it feels like the day is falling away behind you. Like your thoughts are dissolving into the breeze. Like your worries are being carried away by the scent of lavender and sky. The path widens now, just a little, and in the center of the field you find a small wooden bench. It's worn smooth from time, shaded by an old olive tree whose silver-green leaves whisper with the wind. You sit, you breathe, you listen. Time moves differently here, or perhaps it doesn't move at all. The world is still and slow, like it's exhaling with you. You close your eyes, and for a moment there's only your breath and the warm hush of dusk. The lavender hums, the tree murmurs, the sky leans closer. And then gently a memory arrives. It's not sharp or detailed, more like the soft curve of a dream you once had. You remember being held, being safe, being seen. Perhaps it was in a childhood room or beneath stars, or simply a feeling that you belonged. That memory wraps around you now like a blanket of evening light. You feel it in your chest, in your fingertips, in the very soles of your feet. The bench beneath you, the earth below, they all seem to say, you are cared for. You are welcome here. After a while, you rise again. The path continues, curling gently like a stream between the lavender rows. And so you walk on, following the call of quiet. The sun is lower now, nearly brushing the horizon. Its golden light spills like honey over the blooms, turning everything into a gentle watercolor. Ahead you see a stone cottage. It looks as though it has always been there, weathered, soft-edged, part of the land itself. Smoke curls from the chimney and warm light glows in the windows. You approach slowly, sensing that inside something peaceful awaits. The lavender parts to let you pass, as if the field itself is guiding you home. When you reach the door, it's already slightly open. You step inside. The cottage smells like cedar and lemon balm. A kettle sings quietly on the stove, and a soft chair waits by the fireplace. You sit, you sink. The cushions rise to meet your body, holding you with a comfort that says, "Rest now, you've done enough." A woolen blanket is tucked over your lap, and a cup of warm tea is gently placed in your hands. It tastes like chamomile and starlight. Outside, the last birds call out their sleepy songs. And inside, the fire crackles quietly, echoing the rhythm of your slowing breath. You set the tea down and close your eyes again. There's nothing more to see, only the feeling of warmth. Only the quiet. Only the gentle hum of safety. Let your thoughts drift now like petals on a stream. Let them pass without needing to be caught or examined. Each one simply floating by, lighter than before. Your breath becomes slower, softer. Your shoulders heavier. Your chest rising and falling like waves on a moonlit shore. You are safe. You are loved. You are home. And now the cottage begins to fade, not because it is gone, but because you no longer need to see it. Its warmth stays with you, tucked into your breath and your bones. The field fades too, the lavender hum now a lullaby in your dreams. The sky, the bees, the path, all dissolve into the stillness of sleep. You are floating now, deeply relaxed, suspended in quiet, cradled by everything that has ever made you feel safe. And so I leave you here, in this sacred space between thought and dream. Let sleep come like a tide, slow, gentle, inevitable. Let it wrap you in peace. Let it whisper to every cell in your body, "You are enough. You are enough. You are enough." Rest now, dear one. The world can wait. Sleep has found you. And you are ready. It was the stillness that struck me first. Thimblewick didn't hum like a town. It barely whispered. The narrow road I drove in on had been shadowed by trees with limbs like old women's arms, bent and thoughtful. The occasional cottage peeked from behind stone walls, their windows blinking in the afternoon sun, lace curtains fluttering like breath. I'd come to house-sit for my great-aunt Meredith, a woman I'd never met and only recently learned of through a letter passed down via 3 relatives and an estate lawyer. 6 weeks in the country, my roommate had said, half joking. You'll either come back blissfully whole or speaking to hedgehogs. I hadn't told her how much I was hoping for the latter. The cottage itself, Aunt Meredith's, sat just past a curved stone bridge and a small pond where ducks napped in reeds. It was tidy and ivy-framed, with a front garden left to its own soft chaos. Inside I found shelves of books, a kettle older than me, and the unmistakable smell of lavender and dust. Nothing threatening, nothing grand, just stillness. But it wasn't until my third day that I wandered down the moss-lined lane. It curved in such a way that it felt secret, like a passage I hadn't been meant to find. The village had hinted at it. An old shopkeeper nodded vaguely when I asked about the button jars I thought I'd seen from the road. "Ah," he said, "that'd be Ada. Still collects." The lane curved deeper, a tunnel of green. At the end of it stood a cottage that looked as if it had grown from the earth itself. Stone and wood, roof sagging under the weight of creeping wisteria. But what made me stop was the windows, each one filled edge to edge with jars. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, and in each jar buttons, all kinds. Bone white and sapphire blue, gilded and rusted, some the size of coins, others no larger than a lentil. The sign on the gate simply read, "The Button House." I had no intention of knocking. I was just going to admire from a distance. But before I could turn, the door creaked open, and a voice, weathered but warm, called out, "Well, don't just stare, dear. Come in or the tea'll go cold." I hesitated. Then, against all the advice my mother had ever given about strangers, I stepped through the gate. Her name was Ada. She was small, silver-haired, with a kind of agelessness about her. Not young, certainly, but not fragile either. There was a sparkle behind her wire-rimmed glasses that suggested she noticed everything, and judged very little. The inside of her cottage was like walking into a treasure chest. Every wall was shelved with glass jars, and every jar was filled with buttons. The air smelled of bergamot and something faintly metallic. A cat, orange, wide, and uninterested, watched me from a tufted chair in the corner. "Brooklyn, is it?" Ada asked as she poured tea into mismatched china. I blinked. "How did you—" "Small village," she said with a grin. "News blows in faster than weather." We sat near the hearth, and I let the teacup warm my hands. It was silent for a moment, save for the click of a clock and the occasional sigh from the cat. Then Ada gestured to the shelves behind her. "People think I collect buttons, but really I collect stories." I raised an eyebrow. She stood, light on her feet, and selected a jar from the third shelf. She held it as if it were a snow globe, turning it gently before removing the lid. From within she plucked a brass button. It was worn but beautiful, with a tiny bell etched into its surface. "This one," she said softly, "belonged to a girl named Lottie." She offered it to me. I turned it in my fingers. It was surprisingly heavy. Ada leaned back in her chair, her eyes a little distant. "Would you like to hear it?" I nodded. And so, with the fire crackling and the cat now snoring at our feet, Ada told me the story of the bell button. Lottie was 17 when the war reached the edge of her village. She wasn't a soldier nor a nurse, just a girl with a bicycle, a basket, and too much heart to sit still. They called them runners. Girls who knew the hills and roads better than the army did used to ferry messages between outposts when the radios failed or fell silent. Lottie volunteered the day her brother didn't come home. She wore a coat 2 sizes too large, Ada said, eyes twinkling. And this button, she tapped it gently where it now rested in my palm, was the last one sewn on after her 3rd crash. I smiled. She was fearless, Ada went on, carried messages under loaves of bread tucked in the lining of her cap, even once hidden in a dog's collar. But it was the bell that saved her. I leaned forward, entranced. One rainy afternoon, Lottie was caught between roads. Bombers had passed, and the forest was thick with smoke. She couldn't see 5 feet ahead, but then the bell rang. "What bell?" I asked. Ada smiled, tapping the button again. She swore it was this one, said it jingled only once, just enough for her to hear her captain's voice shouting from the trees. "That's impossible." Ada's voice lowered. "Most true stories are." She sipped her tea. They found her an hour later, dazed and muddy but alive. The message in her pocket led to the rescue of 20 villagers trapped in a barn outside Windmere. I stared at the button again. Suddenly it felt warmer. "She never married," Ada said, her voice suddenly softer. "But she kept that coat, and the button, gave it to me in a little envelope on her 82nd birthday, told me to tell someone the story when the right ears came along." "And you think those ears are mine?" She tilted her head, considering. "I think," she said, "you needed to hear about courage today." I left an hour later with a full thermos of tea and a mind I couldn't quiet. I didn't believe in magic, not really. But something about the way Ada spoke. It didn't feel made up. It felt inherited. Back at my aunt's cottage, I sat at the kitchen table and placed the button gently in the middle. The candlelight caught its etched bell just so, and for the briefest second I could almost hear it. A faint chime. A whisper. The village outside was quiet. The stars bold. I told myself I'd return the button tomorrow. But as I fell asleep, the story echoed in me, threading through my chest like it had been waiting for a place to land. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn to the button house again and again. Ada never seemed surprised. Each visit brought a new story. A healer's button shaped like a silver leaf. A sailor's clasp engraved with the initials of someone he never stopped writing to. A child's button made of painted wood, worn smooth by love. And with each story, I felt something unfurl in me, something old and long forgotten. Like maybe I hadn't come to Thimblewick just to house sit. Maybe the village had been waiting. or maybe the buttons had. But that was just the beginning. There was still so much I didn't know. Like why Ada kept her own story off the shelf, or what would happen when I finally found the button that matched my own past. But I was ready to find out. And for now, that was enough. I hadn't meant to return so soon. But there I was, standing before the moss-wrapped gate of Miss Ada's button cottage the very next afternoon, cradling a loaf of warm honey oat bread I'd picked up at the village bakery. An excuse, really. I told myself it was neighborly, polite, that I should thank her for the tea and story. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Something tugged at me. Perhaps it was the way her cottage had smelled, cedar and chamomile, or the quiet magic in how she'd said my name, as if she'd known it long before I offered it. I knocked more gently than needed. The door creaked open before my hand even fell to my side. "Brooklyn," Ada beamed, wearing a wool cardigan stitched with tiny daisies, her silvery hair pulled into a soft knot. "I hoped you'd come back." "I brought something," I said, suddenly shy. "It's from the bakery. I wasn't sure if—" She took the loaf with reverence as if I'd handed her a treasure, perfect for story weather. I followed her inside, where the fire crackled in its hearth and the walls glowed amber with late-day light. Buttons, in every imaginable color and shape, winked from their jars. Each jar had a label, some written in Ada's neat script. Velvet whispers, first goodbyes, storms we rode. Ada poured cinnamon tea this time. The steam curled upward like a sigh. I sat cross-legged on the braided rug beside her rocking chair as she reached for another jar. She didn't ask if I wanted a story. She just knew. "Shall we let the button choose us?" she asked. I nodded, breath held. From a jar labeled Forest Heart, she plucked a delicate silver leaf-shaped button, its edges scalloped and green tarnished. She placed it in my palm, cool and light. I turned it over. Its back was plain save for the tiniest M, etched near the shank. "A healer once wore this," Ada began, settling into her chair. "Not the kind you visit in a clinic. She lived in the woods and knew the language of plants." My chest rose and fell with her words, as if the rhythm of her voice had taken up residence in my lungs. She was called Melly, came to the village once a season, her boots muddy and eyes kind. People were wary at first. She spoke softly and listened too much, but she had a way of touching a fevered brow or wrapping a wound in moss, and pain would ease. Ada's eyes sparkled. One autumn, a child wandered too deep into the forest. The villagers searched for days. On the fourth evening, Melly arrived, cloak wet with rain, child asleep on her back like a babe. No one asked how she found him, just that he was warm, safe. They never doubted her again. I clutched the button. "That silver leaf," Ada said, was sewn onto her cloak, over her heart. The boy later became a poet. He said she stitched the forest into him that night. I sat quiet, tea cooling in my hands. That boy's poem stirred something in me, a memory of being small and lost in my own way. I used to make up stories like that, I said, unsure where the words came from. Little lives for the things no one noticed, especially when things got hard. Ada tilted her head. Do you still? No. I smiled weakly. I think I forgot how. She reached for a second jar, fingers brushing glass like greeting old friends. This one was labeled Farewells and Footsteps. She pulled out a button the color of dusk, smoky blue, rimmed with faded gold. This, she said, belonged to a dress worn during a final dance. The story that followed was full of music and longing. A woman named Thalia, who had danced barefoot in a summer field with the man she loved, knowing he'd leave for the sea at sunrise. They twirled until stars blinked awake and morning crept over the hills. She stitched this button onto her sash so she wouldn't forget the weight of that night, Ada said. Sometimes memories are sewn into us without permission. Other times we choose to carry them. I blinked fast. That ache, the quiet one I'd tried to pack away before coming to Thimblewick, pressed harder against my ribs. I hadn't meant to cry, but the truth of it snuck out, warm and quiet. Heartache? Ada asked gently, though she already knew. I nodded. His name was Seth. We built a life together in the city. 8 years. My throat thickened. Then one day, he said he didn't recognize himself in it anymore, or in us. Ada didn't offer pity, just presence. Her silence was kind. I sipped my tea to ground myself. She reached for one final jar, wind and wonder. From it she withdrew a button shaped like a small shell, pale with an opalescent sheen. This came from the cloak of a songbird keeper, she whispered, as though sharing a sacred truth. His name was Lior. He lived near the cliffs and spoke the language of birds. Sailors said when storms rolled in, he'd stand near the lighthouse and hum low lullabies. The skies listened. She closed her eyes. One summer, a terrible gale hit, but the ships came home. Lior, however, was never seen again. Only this button remained, caught in a sea-weathered nest. I felt it in my chest again, that quiet echo of longing for something I couldn't name. Were those stories real? I asked. Ada smiled softly. They are now. She rose and walked to a shelf I hadn't noticed before. It held only a single jar, dustier than the others. No label. Inside were just 3 buttons. She opened the lid and let her fingers sift. Then she handed me one. It was plain. Round, ivory, no pattern, no shine. The kind of button you'd overlook. No story? I asked. She shook her head. Some buttons wait for their stories, and some wait for their storyteller. I held it between thumb and forefinger. It felt strangely warm, like it had been in the sun. That night back in my temporary cottage, I couldn't shake the quiet weight of that last button. I set it on the bedside table and sat cross-legged on the bed, knees tucked under a blanket. Rain tapped gently on the window pane. The scent of chamomile still lingered in my sweater. I pulled open the drawer of the nightstand, looking for nothing in particular, and there, tucked beneath a pile of old postcards and a candle stub, was my journal. The blue leather cover had dulled with time. I hadn't written in it since before Seth and I had begun unraveling. I hesitated, then opened it. The pages smelled faintly of ink and lavender. Flipping through it felt like thumbing through old versions of myself. There were sketches of dream towns, snippets of half-formed poems, entries written in coffee shops when the world still felt ripe with possibility. I found a blank page, and I began to write. Not about Seth. Not yet. Instead, I wrote about Melly, the forest healer who stitched life back into a child with moss and warmth. I wrote about Thalia's barefoot dance and Leor's storm-calming lullabies. I wrote as if I were bottling the stories in ink, pressing them between the lines like petals. And then, on a fresh page, I turned the plane button in my fingers and began again. I don't know your story yet, I whispered, pen poised. But maybe, if I listen long enough, you'll tell me. The ink flowed easily. Words poured like tea from a well-worn kettle. And just like that, something inside me softened. Not healed, not yet, but stirred. Like a leaf in early spring, unsure but ready to unfurl. Outside, the rain fell steady. Inside, I wrote through the hush. And somewhere across the village, I imagined Miss Ada smiling in her sleep, because she had known. Some buttons don't have stories. Not because they never did, but because they were waiting for someone to remember. And tonight, I had remembered how. The storm arrived like an old friend, loud, moody, and oddly comforting. Rain splashed in erratic rhythms against the cottage windows, while the wind swirled through the narrow lane like it had secrets to tell. I should have been afraid, I guess. But something about Thimblewick and about Ada's button-filled cottage made me feel like I'd landed in a pocket of time where storms were simply part of the lullaby. I clutched my coat tighter and hurried down the mossy path. The wind tugged at my sleeves as though trying to persuade me to turn back, but I was already committed. Besides, Ada had invited me back for tea today, and for another story. When I reached her porch, light flickered behind the lace curtains. I knocked twice. The door creaked open before I could lift my hand a third time. "Come in, love," Ada said with a warmth that wrapped around me like a knitted shawl. "Before the wind steals you away." I stepped into her little world. Lanterns glowed golden on wooden shelves, casting soft shadows over the hundreds of button jars that lined every wall. Each one shimmered in its own hue: pearl, brass, plum velvet, bone, sea glass. The cottage smelled of lavender and lemon soap and something toasty. "I didn't think the storm would keep you away," Ada said, ushering me in with her usual grace. You've got a heart that leans into weather, I think. That made me smile, even if I didn't fully understand it. I peeled off my damp coat and hung it by the stove. The warmth from the cast iron radiated into my bones. Ada handed me a cup of tea, cinnamon with a curl of orange peel floating on top, and I followed her to the sitting room. The buttons seemed quieter today, if that made any sense. Less showy, more observant. Or maybe it was just me. I was quieter too. I've been thinking about your story, I said. The one with the messenger girl and the bell button. Ada nodded, settling into her chair. She'd pulled her sewing square out again, navy velvet with tiny button-sized stitches around the border. There are always more stories, she said. But sometimes it's not about telling them. Sometimes it's about listening in between the lines. Lightning lit the room briefly, and for a moment her white braid shimmered like silver thread. "What are you stitching?" I asked. Ada looked down at her velvet square. "Memories," she said. "Or maybe just little truths. The kind you can hold in your palm when the world gets too loud." We sat in silence, the kind that felt like company rather than absence. I picked up a thimble from the tray beside her and ran my thumb across its tiny dimples. "There's something peaceful about this," I said softly. "This being here, I haven't felt that in a long time." Ada didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached behind her and opened a drawer from the old sewing table. From within, she pulled out a strip of deep burgundy ribbon, faded at the edges but still elegant. Tied at both ends were two identical buttons, pale blue, carved with tiny roses. "These," she said, placing it gently on the table between us, "are what I was thinking of when you walked in." I stared at the ribbon. Something about it tugged at a memory I didn't know I had. "They're the same," I said, tracing one of the buttons with my fingertip. "Twin buttons." Ada nodded. Her eyes were far away for a moment, then she smiled faintly. "They were meant for a coat that never got finished," she murmured. I didn't want to pry. I'd learned by now that Ada offered stories the way some people poured tea, carefully and only when the cup was warm enough to receive it. "Were they yours?" I asked gently. Her hands paused mid-stitch. She looked at the ribbon as though it had once sung to her. "They were meant for someone I loved, or rather someone I almost loved. The kind of person who passes through your life like a comet, bright, brief, impossible to forget." I leaned back and waited. The storm tapped at the windows like a patient listener. "I met him in the summer I turned 20, Ada continued. "I was apprenticing with a tailor in the city. He was studying philosophy and always forgot his gloves. That's how we met. He'd left them on a bench, and I returned them with a note sewn inside the lining." "What did the note say?" She chuckled softly. "Just a riddle. About buttons, of course. He solved it and came looking for me." The lantern flickered, casting warm light on her weathered face. We spent every Saturday that summer walking the cobbled alleys and collecting odd little treasures, buttons mostly. He said each one was a portal. To where? To the heart, he used to say. Buttons keep things close, coats, secrets, people. He believed in tiny magic. I think that's what I loved most. I found myself holding my breath. But the summer ended, she said, and so did we. He wanted to travel. I wanted to stay. I chose steadiness. He chose the unknown. We wrote for a while, and then we didn't. She gently stroked the twin buttons with her thumb. These were for the coat I started making him. I stitched in silence, hoping he'd return, but he didn't. A sadness filled the room, but it wasn't heavy. It was soft and worn like an old quilt. "Do you think of him still?" I asked. Ada looked over at me with that ageless gaze. "Not often, not always, but on stormy nights, yes, I do." She pushed the ribbon toward me. "Go on," she said. "Hold it." I did. The buttons were cold, but the ribbon felt warm, like it had soaked in 100 sunsets. "Why keep them together?" I asked. Her eyes crinkled. "Because sometimes the story isn't in the ending. It's in the almost. The thread that might have been cut, but wasn't." I didn't know what to say, so I hummed instead. The tune from her first tale, the one about the messenger girl and her bell. I hadn't realized I'd memorized it. Ada's needle paused, then resumed in rhythm with my humming. "Thank you," she said softly. I wasn't sure if she meant for the question, the song, or the silence. Maybe all of it. We sat there like that for a long time. Me with the twin button ribbon still in my lap, her with the velvet square in hers. The storm outside softened as though eavesdropping had calmed it. At one point, Ada handed me a needle and a scrap of deep green cloth. "Make a stitch," she said. "Doesn't have to be perfect." I'd never sewn a thing in my life, but I threaded the needle and made a crooked little X, then another. We stitched side by side, not speaking, just letting the quiet work its magic. Eventually I said, "I think I'm going to start journaling again." Ada smiled without looking up. "Good. Your words are buttonholes, you know." "What do you mean?" "They give memory something to fasten to." Something shifted in my chest at that. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed myself, my own voice on the page. Since the breakup, I'd buried so much. Grief, anger, hope, like stones in deep water. But Ada was helping me retrieve them, one stitch, one story at a time. When the tea went cold and the thunder rolled farther into the distance, Ada finally spoke again. "Some buttons," she said, "wait a long time for their stories. But when the right person comes along, they begin to whisper." I nodded, understanding something unspoken. "I think," I said slowly, "that maybe I was meant to be here, that this storm, this strange little chapter is mine." Ada smiled. Then let's stitch it well. And so we did. Under the soft golden lantern light, we stitched the storm into memory. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this. I would return to my journal. I would return to this cottage. I would follow the thread wherever it led. Because here in the house of buttons, I was finally beginning to sew myself back together. The rain had returned, soft and steady, drumming on the roof of the button cottage like a lullaby. I had taken to visiting Ada nearly every afternoon now, drawn by something deeper than stories, something I didn't quite understand but felt stitched into the seams of her presence. There was comfort in the quiet way she brewed tea, the way her fingers moved with intention across fabric and thread. On this particular day, the air held a hush, the kind that makes you instinctively speak softer. I arrived with a tin of scones I'd picked up from the bakery, still warm. Ada greeted me with her usual smile, subtle, not wide, but warm enough to feel like it had been meant only for me. "The kettle's just beginning to think about boiling," she said as she ushered me in. Perfect timing. I settled at the table near the window, my hands cupping a mug soon filled with lavender chamomile. The cottage smelled of rosewood, cinnamon, and a faint trace of lemon polish, like memory and care had steeped into the very walls. After a quiet half-hour of stitching together a swatch of velvet with Ada, she excused herself to find a particular ribbon she claimed was hiding with the stubborn things. While she disappeared into the back room, I noticed a stack of fabric swatches piled on the far end of the table. Some were torn at the edges, others neatly pressed. Beneath the pile, almost by accident, a drawer had slipped open slightly. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't. But something, maybe the way the air shifted or the quiet tug of curiosity, made me reach forward. Inside was a letter. Yellowed with time, its envelope bore only a single name in curling script. Ada. No address, no return information, just Ada. I shouldn't have opened it, I knew that. But my fingers were already moving, unfolding the creased paper. And before I could stop myself, my eyes were reading. Dearest Ada, you always did say I used too many words and never the right ones. So here I go again. Foolishly trying. You wore the lilac dress the night we danced in the orchard. Do you remember? The music was just wind and our laughter, and you looked like you belonged to the stars. I didn't say goodbye properly. I couldn't, because if I had, I wouldn't have left, and I had to leave. I had to. I've never stopped carrying you. I see you in every bit of gold thread, in every wild bloom. If I could stitch a world back together, you'd be the center of it. Love always, Elsie. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. I wasn't sure if it was the draft through the cracked window or the quiet thud of something in my chest, something recognizing the ache between the lines. Ada, I called softly, my voice nearly swallowed by the ticking clock and the clinking of buttons in their jars. She returned a moment later, not with a ribbon, but with a slight furrow in her brow that relaxed the second she saw what I held. Her eyes, blue-gray and fathomless, met mine. She said nothing for a while. "I found it by accident," I said, guilt curling around my ribs. She held up a hand, not in reprimand, but in understanding. She walked over, slowly, and eased herself into the chair across from me. The letter remained on the table between us, its edges still fluttering like a memory trying to settle. "Elsie had a way of writing what I couldn't say out loud," Ada said, her voice calm, far away. "She always did." I didn't mean to pry. Ada gave a soft smile, faint as a shadow but real. "Some stories. Some buttons don't want to be remembered, Brooklyn. That doesn't mean they're angry about being found." There was a long silence then. Not awkward, not heavy, just full. I watched her thumb the edge of the letter, her mind somewhere behind the fog of years. I could feel her hesitating, on the edge of something, a story not often spoken aloud. "Do you want to tell me about her?" I asked gently. She looked out the window, her eyes following the silver lines of rain on glass. Then, slowly, she nodded. "She was everything too bright to last forever," Ada said, her voice like wool, soft, warm, and a little worn. "We were young. I was barely 20 when I met her. She worked at the fabric stall in the summer market. I pretended I needed spools of thread I didn't, just to keep seeing her." Her hands, worn and graceful, reached toward a nearby jar. Inside, nestled between deep navy and faded taupe buttons, was a single gold one. She lifted it out carefully, like a relic. "This," she said, holding it up so the lamplight caught its soft gleam, "was the first button I ever kept." "It's beautiful," I said. "It belonged to a coat I gave back." Ada smiled, a half curve filled with both pride and pain. "Elsie's coat. She'd lost a button one winter and I offered to fix it. We walked through the snow together, me with frozen fingers, her with stars in her voice. I mended the coat. She left the button behind. I wanted to ask why. Why Elsie left, why the letter was never sent, why so many buttons were gathered in this cottage like echoes waiting to be remembered. But I didn't. I just listened. She was wild in the way the sea is wild. You never quite know if it will pull you under or lift you to something new. Ada ran her thumb over the golden button. We made each other laugh. We talked of running away to sew stories into clouds and wear skirts made of sunflower petals. She had a laugh that made birds quiet just to listen. But dreams can be heavier than we think, especially when the world doesn't welcome them. I thought of my own heart, still aching from a breakup that had frayed the edges of who I thought I was. I thought of the silent moments, the unanswered texts, the way goodbyes sometimes sneak in through the smallest cracks. She left, Ada said simply. For school, for safety, for reasons I understood and hated all at once. The world wasn't kind to girls like us, still isn't, not always. "Did she come back?" I whispered. Once, briefly, years later. Ada's voice caught, a thread snagging. She wore the coat again, but it wasn't winter anymore and we weren't the same girls. A log in the fireplace let out a soft pop. The rain hadn't let up. I found myself tracing the seam of the tablecloth, the silence between us now stitched with a different kind of closeness. She sent me that letter a month after she'd gone. I never wrote back. I tried, but I didn't know how to answer something that hurt so beautifully. Ada folded the letter, not to hide it, but like someone tucking in a sleeping memory. "She's part of this cottage," she said. "Not in ghosts, but in the way the light hits the shelves, the way the buttons line up in odd numbers, the way I keep lilacs in the garden. Every love leaves something, even if it stays only a season." I nodded, not sure what words could match hers. "I've always believed," Ada added, "that buttons are little echoes. They hold laughter, partings, promises. Some fall off in grief, others are sewn on in hope, and some wait." "For their stories?" I asked. She met my gaze and smiled fully now. "Yes, and sometimes it takes the right person to come along and help them speak." That night, back in my own borrowed cottage, I lit a single candle and sat with my journal. The words came slowly at first, like rain down a window pane. I wrote about Ada, about Elsie, about gold buttons and lilac dresses. And then I wrote about my own love, the one I had tried to forget. The pain was still there, but so was the laughter, the feeling of being seen, the moments we stitched into afternoons that felt like forever. Perhaps we are all button collectors in some way, keeping fragments, letting them settle until we're ready to hold them again. I placed my pen down and traced a small gold circle on the page, a button not from Ada's jars, but from memory, my own. And for the first time in months, I felt something return. Not quite peace, not yet, but the beginning of it, just enough to carry me to morning. The morning after the storm, Thimblewick felt rinsed clean. Mist clung low to the hedges, and a pearly hush lingered on the cobblestones. I stood at the kitchen window, cradling my tea, watching the sleepy village blink into another soft, cloud-swirled day. Yet something in me felt brighter, not in a loud fireworks way, more like the warmth of a single candle left burning through the night. I'd slipped the envelope into Ada's mailbox just before sunrise. The ink was still damp, and I had to will myself not to reread it for the 100th time. My fingers had trembled as I folded the pages, though I'd rewritten them 3 times. It wasn't just a story about a woman and a girl. It was about her, about me, about what listening and stillness can stir in someone who didn't know she needed it. I had written about the plain wooden button, the one that had sat at the edge of Ada's sewing table for weeks, quiet and unclaimed. She'd once run her fingers over it and said softly, "Some buttons are waiting for the right story." Last night I decided to give it one. I hadn't planned to write anything at all, but after returning home I sat at my little writing desk, the one by the round window with the curtain that always slipped off the hook, and before I knew it, words spilled from me like rainwater down a slate roof. It had been months since I'd written anything beyond the occasional scribble in my journal, but that night it felt necessary. I told the tale of a quiet woman who lived in a cottage of stories, her walls lined with forgotten memories sewn into circles of shell, wood, and brass, and of a restless girl who stumbled upon her after losing her way, not just in geography, but in herself. The woman offered her tea and silence, and then stories. Through them, the girl found herself again, not whole, not all at once, but stitched in places that had long been torn. I hadn't signed it. I didn't need to. Now, as I slipped on my cardigan and laced my boots, I told myself not to expect anything. Maybe Ada wouldn't say a word. Maybe she'd never read it. Maybe the letter would remain tucked between catalogs and seed envelopes and never see the light. Still, I found myself walking the familiar mossy lane, the one that curved gently like a thread drawn across a patch of velvet green. The Button cottage stood ahead, chimney breathing faint tendrils of smoke, windows fogged at the edges like eyes just waking. I knocked. The door opened before I could count to 3. "Ah, Brooklyn," Ada said, as if she'd been expecting me. "You're just in time. I made plum cake." I blinked, caught between relief and curiosity. "Is it a special occasion?" She stepped aside with a smirk. "Only that I felt like it." The warmth of the cottage embraced me like always, soft and lavender-scented. The usual chaos of button jars and teacups, embroidery hoops and ribbon scraps, still felt like stepping into a memory stitched by hand. I began, fingers brushing my coat pocket, even though it was empty now. She turned toward the stove and poured tea into mismatched china. "Milk or lemon today?" I hesitated. "Lemon." She nodded. No mention of the letter. I sank into my usual chair by the window, one leg tucked under me. The wooden button still sat on the table, right where it had always been. She noticed me glancing at it. "Funny thing about that one," she said. "I almost tossed it years ago. Didn't seem to hold much at all. No color, no gleam, just plain, quiet." "Not everything has to be loud to matter," I said before I could stop myself. Ada's smile deepened. No it doesn't." We sat in a calm hush, plum cake melting on our tongues, sun beginning to stream through the curtains like honey. The room felt wrapped in something unspoken. Then, as I reached for my teacup, she leaned forward and set something in front of me. A small square of creamy parchment. My letter. Only, it wasn't exactly as I'd left it. I stared, confused. How did you... I hope you don't mind, she said gently. I made a few edits. Edits? I unfolded the pages, hands trembling with a strange mixture of nerves and wonder. My words were there, but in the margins she had written small, delicate notes, tiny additions, suggestions. A line she underlined. The woman healed not by fixing, but by witnessing. Next to it she'd written in blue ink, exactly this. Tears sprang to my eyes. She does see, doesn't she? I whispered. Ada sipped her tea, gazing out the window. You saw her too. I looked up at her. So, she's you? Ada laughed, soft and unguarded. Maybe. And maybe she's someone else entirely. Maybe she's every woman who's ever stitched her own grief into something gentle. My throat thickened. And the girl? She asked. She's a little lost, but learning to stay still long enough to feel what's real. I looked down. I think she didn't know how much silence could hold. Ada nodded, eyes twinkling. Then she's you too. We sat in the hum of that understanding. She picked up the plain wooden button and turned it between her fingers. This one now has a tail. Yours. Shall we jar it? I hesitated. Can I keep it? She looked surprised. It feels like a reminder of something I don't want to forget. Her smile was quiet and full. Then it's yours. She wrapped it in soft muslin and placed it in my palm like a treasure. Back at my cottage, I placed the button on the desk beside my journal. That night, I wrote again. Not a story this time, just a memory. I wrote about my ex, about the way things had unraveled not all at once, but stitch by stitch. I wrote about the moment I knew we were pretending at happiness, about the way I packed my suitcase, numb and shaking, thinking I'd failed at something everyone else seemed to do so easily. I wrote until I couldn't see the page. Then I wrote about the buttons, the bell, the silver leaf, the songbird, the thread that had pulled me here, not to escape, but to arrive. A week passed like that, writing, visiting, listening. Sometimes Ada shared a story. Sometimes she simply handed me a button and we sat in silence. Other times I brought a tale of my own. We traded stories like quilt squares. And then came a day when I arrived to find the door open, a breeze lifting the lace curtains. A kettle whistled softly in the background. Ada stood in the center of the room with a small wooden box. I think it's time, she said. For what? She opened the box. Inside were 3 buttons I'd never seen before, each wrapped in a note tied with thread. I've been keeping these, she said. They've waited long enough. I picked up the top one, a smooth, moon-white shell button, luminous and cool. I untied the thread and read the note, to the girl who gave silence a voice. My breath caught. The next one, she said, nodding. The second was silver, shaped like a crescent. The note read, to the listener who became a storyteller, and the last, circular black velvet covered with a pearl center, to the one who remembered how to feel. I held them all in my lap, heart thudding. "These aren't from your stories," I whispered. "No," she said, "they're from yours." I looked at her. "Why are you giving them to me?" "Because you gave the wooden button a tail," she said, "and in doing so you started stitching yourself back together. These are yours now." A knot I hadn't even known was there loosened in my chest. "I don't know what to say," I murmured. She stepped closer and touched my shoulder. "You don't need to say anything." That evening I walked back slowly, the buttons nestled in my coat pocket like the softest kind of weight. I stopped at the old iron gate near the lane and turned toward the setting sun. The village shimmered in gold and blush light. Distant chimneys curled smoke into the sky. Somewhere a wind chime sang. I thought of all the untold stories in the world, buttons in jars, waiting for hands to find them, waiting for someone to listen long enough to hear them whisper. And for the first time in months, maybe longer, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was becoming, not someone new, just someone truer. As I reached my cottage, I tucked the buttons into a little wooden bowl on the windowsill beside the wooden one that started it all. Tomorrow I'd write again. And maybe, just maybe, I'd start a story with this line. Once there was a girl who came looking for quiet and found her voice instead. And maybe this time I wouldn't write it for Ada. I'd write it for me. It was the kind of morning that felt like the village itself was holding its breath. The mist, soft and pearled with dew, curled along the cobbled lanes of Thimblewick like memory. My suitcase thumped softly behind me as I made my final walk to Ada's cottage. I'd rehearsed 100 goodbyes the night before, but now they tangled in my throat like stray threads. The cottage door was already open. I found her in the garden, her fingers brushing over the lavender as though committing its texture to memory. She turned when she heard my steps and smiled. Not the sort of smile that tries to chase away sadness, but one that understands it has a place at the table too. "You're leaving before the bees have finished their tea," she said gently, nodding toward the buzzing huddle at the base of a rosemary bush. I laughed despite the lump in my chest. Didn't want to give them a chance to change my mind. Ada straightened, wiped her hands on her apron, and tilted her head. "Come inside, Brooklyn. I have something for you." I followed her through the kitchen door, past the teapot that had steeped more stories than any I'd ever known, past the worn rug that my feet had memorized. The familiar scent of cinnamon, dust, and lemon verbena clung to the air. I tried to take it all in like a deep breath I could carry with me. Ada reached into the top drawer of the old apothecary chest, the one where she kept her whimsical necessities, as she called them. She pulled out a small round tin. The paint on the lid was chipped. Roses, maybe once red, now faded to blush. She pressed it into my hand. "These are yours," she said, "the ones that chose you." I blinked. "Buttons?" She nodded. 7 of them, one for each story that stirred something in you. Maybe you thought you were just listening, but I saw it. How you leaned forward, how your fingers trembled when I spoke of the girl who calmed the storm, how you reached for your heart when I told you about the button without a tail. She placed a hand over mine, warm and steady. Stories don't just live in the telling, dear. They take root in the listener. I opened the tin slowly. Nestled inside on a piece of cotton cloth were 7 buttons. I recognized them immediately. The brass one with the bell etched in its center, the silver leaf, the twin glass ones bound by ribbon, the cracked pearl heart, the wooden one I'd given a story to, the golden one that had belonged to her first love, and a final button I didn't recognize. It was pale blue, smooth like sea glass, and oddly warm in my hand. "That one," she said, nodding at the blue button, "I believe was always yours. Just waited for the right moment to be found." I looked up, heart swelling with something hard to name. "I don't know how to thank you. You already have. You listened." I closed the tin, clutching it close as we moved back to the front door. The train would leave soon. The part of me that had come to Thimblewick brittle and restless felt softer now, like it had been wrapped in wool and gently mended. Ada stood in the doorway as I walked backward down the path. "You'll write?" she called. "Every word," I promised, lifting the tin. And I meant it. The train station was quiet, save for the crows gathered on the fence and the distant hiss of the approaching engine. I found a bench and waited, setting my suitcase beside me. I kept turning the tin over in my hands, as if the metal could somehow absorb the weight of this goodbye. As I stood to board, a brisk wind tugged at my coat. That's when I noticed it. One of the buttons was missing. The topmost one, right near the collar. A small, frayed thread curled like a question mark. I smiled. Without hesitation, I opened the tin and plucked out the blue sea glass button. Its smooth surface caught the morning light, glinting like the first idea of something new. I held it there for a moment, thumb brushing its edge before slipping it into my coat pocket. I'd sew it on later. For now, just holding it felt enough. The train car was nearly empty. I chose a window seat and settled in, my suitcase tucked beside me, the tin nestled on my lap. The village began to recede, rooftops blurred by mist, hedgerows turning to green smudges, the curve of the hills like the pages of a story closing softly. I rested my head against the window and closed my eyes. And then I began. Not a story about a forest healer or a dancing farewell. Not even the tale of the wartime messenger or the twin-hearted buttons. This time I started writing mine. Once upon a softened silence, a woman arrived in a village stitched together by time and tea leaves. She came with a suitcase full of ache and questions, thinking she was there to rest. But the cottage full of buttons whispered otherwise. Each tale peeled something back in her, not all at once. Sometimes it was a stitch unraveling. Sometimes it was a breath she hadn't realized she'd held for years. She had forgotten how to listen to her own voice, but the stories reminded her, not through loud declarations or sweeping epiphanies, but through small human truths, the kind tucked into the spaces between sentences, the way the old woman's eyes glistened when she spoke of her first love, the pause between lines when grief entered the room, the stillness after a story ended and something new began. And when she left, she did not go empty-handed. She carried 7 buttons in a tin, 7 pieces of memory sewn not into cloth, but into the seams of her soul. And 1 button more, blue as possibility. The train curved around a bend, and for a moment the sun broke through. Golden light flooded the car, and the tin in my lap glowed warm beneath my fingertips. I opened my notebook. The page was blank, but not in a lonely way, in a way that beckoned. My pen moved without hesitation. The button from the collar of her coat had fallen somewhere between stories. It had grown tired of being fastened and released day after day. So it slipped free. Let the wind carry it toward the garden where the rosemary grew, where the bees still sipped. Ada found it later, nestled in the grass, and tucked it into a jar labeled Returns. That's the thing about stories. Some buttons fall off just to find their way back. Some are never meant to be found again. And some wait quietly in tins until the moment someone needs them. I smiled, then paused to glance out the window. Trees rushed past like breath. The sky above was soft and wide. Hours later, back in the city, the streets hummed and clattered around me, but I didn't shrink from the noise. I carried Thimblewick in my pocket. At home, I placed the tin of buttons on my writing desk, the same one that had sat quiet for months before the village stitched something new inside me. I retrieved a needle, thread, and the blue button, sewed it onto my coat with deliberate stitches. Loop, pull, knot. Each motion a promise. When I finished, I shrugged on the coat. It felt right again, whole, and then I turned back to my desk. They say the best stories leave something behind, a question, a warmth, a thread you didn't notice before, now pulled loose and waiting to be followed. Ada had given me stories. But more than that, she reminded me how to tell my own. And that, I think, is the greatest gift of all. So here I am, pen in hand, not writing to forget, but to remember, not escaping but arriving. And just as I begin the first line of a brand new tale, a button on my coat catches the light, blue, bright, and entirely mine. And that ends tonight's meditation. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer if you like. Have a beautiful night, Until next time.